Hello, welcome to Pragim Technologies. I'm Venkat. This is part 31 of SQL Server. In this session, we'll learn about creating and calling inline table valued functions. Where do we use inline table valued functions? Now, before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch part 30 of this video series. In part 30, we have seen how to create and call scalar user-defined functions. In this part, we'll learn about inline table valued functions. We know that a scalar function returns a scalar value, a single value, whereas an inline table valued function returns a table. Now, let's look at an example of creating an inline table valued function. Now if you look at this, I've got an employee table which has got ID, name, date of birth, gender, and department ID columns. Now I want you to write a function that can give me the output that you can see on the right hand side. The function should return employees by gender. For example, if I pass to your function gender as male, I want only the male employees to be returned. And along the same lines, if I pass the gender as female, and I only want the female employees to be returned. Okay, and to do that we use the create function statement as we have used it to create scalar function. Okay, so create, if you look at the implementation of the function here, it's very simple to understand. So we use the create function statement. So create function name, and fn underscore employees by gender is the name of the function, because we are going to return employees by gender. And if you look at this, obviously this function needs a parameter at gender of type envarchar whose length is 10. Okay, since gender is a string, we use envarchar data type, and then this function returns table. Okay, so this is the parameter that we are passing into this function at gender, and this function returns table. If you remember in part 30, where we spoke about scalar user defined functions, scalar function return a scalar data type. For example, maybe envarchar or integer or datetime, a scalar value. But we want this function now to return a list of employees by gender. Okay, so obviously we want this function to return a table, so we are specifying table as the return type from this function using the returns keyword. And then we are using as keyword and return. Look at this. For an inline table valued function, we are not using the begin and end block. If you remember, for the scalar user defined function, we had begin and end block. The function body was enclosed within that block. But for an inline table valued function, it's a compile time error to have basically the begin and end block. You cannot have it for an inline table valued function. So immediately after the as keyword, you specify the return, and within brackets you specify your select statement. Okay, so what do we want here? We want ID, name, date of birth, gender, and department ID columns. So specify them in your select list from TBL employees table, where gender equals at gender parameter, whatever the user is going to pass in. Okay, so we are using that parameter there, and we are enclosing that entire select statement in parentheses. Okay, just, even if you don't indicate that, we don't get an error, but it is more readable now. After whatever is present in this parenthesis is completed, return the output of the execution, of the execution result of the select statement back to the calling application. So when somebody calls your function, return whatever your select statement is selecting here. Okay, so if you notice, there are 3 points to keep in mind when we compare inline table valued functions with scalar user defined functions. Now with scalar functions, with inline table valued functions, we specify table as the return type, whereas for scalar functions we specify any of the scalar data types like integer, envarchar, etc. Okay, and for scalar functions, here the function body is not enclosed between begin and end block. The structure of the table, this is very important. Now look at this, you're telling your function it's going to return a table, but what are the columns that are going to be present in that table? Basically the structure of the table, we are not defining that here. Okay, so the structure of the table will be determined by the select statement that you have. So obviously the table that this function is going to return is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, because your select query has 5 columns within its select list. Okay, so the structure of the table that gets returned is determined by the select statement within the function body. Okay, but later in the next session we'll be talking about multi-statement table valued function. There we have the luxury of specifying the structure of the table within the return after the return keyword. We'll talk about that in the next session. Okay, so let's look quickly, creating how to create this function. So if you look at this, I have this TBL employees table, which is got the columns that we have seen on the slide. And to create the function, we use the create function keyword, the name of the function, and then obviously the parameter that we want to pass along with its data type, returns table. You specify the as keyword, return, and your select statement within brackets. Okay, so let's execute this. So when I execute, command completed successfully. Okay, so where did this function get created? If you look at the context, we are executing this query in the sample database. So once I expand sample database, go to programmability and then to functions, there you should see table valued functions. In part 30, when we created scalar function, that was stored within the scalar valued functions table. But this is a table valued function, an inline table valued function. So that gets stored in this table valued functions folder. If you can't see that, just refresh it and expand the plus sign. You should see the function that we have just created, which is fn underscore employees by gender. Okay. Now let us see how to call this function. So obviously to call this function, we use the syntax select star from the function name and then pass whatever parameters you have to pass to that function. Now this function returns a table, so treat as if it is a table. Okay, now if we want to select from a table, we will say select star from that table name. Similarly, this is an inline table valued function. Just issue a select statement against this inline table valued function as if you would issue a select statement against a table. So select star from that function name. Okay, so let's see how to execute that. So select star from, I want all the male employees, so I'm passing in male, and when we execute this query we only get the male employees back. And along the same lines, if I want female employees, I just pass female and execute the query, so I only get the female employees. Okay, that's the syntax that we use to execute, to call the function. Now if you want, you can even say use the where clause. From with a table we can use the where clause. Even with the function you can use the where clause. Okay, this is an inline table valued function. We get a table back, so treat as if it's a table. And you can just say where name is equal to maybe Pam. I only get Pam's record now when we execute this. Alright. Okay, so where can we actually use this inline table valued function? Okay, you can use, inline table valued functions can be used to achieve the functionality of parameterized views. Now, what is a view and what are parameterized views? We haven't spoken about them yet. We'll be talking about them in our later sessions. So until then, don't worry about this point. But just keep in mind that inline table valued functions are an exceptional replacement for parameterized views, which we will talk about in detail in a later session. Okay, and another place where you can actually use this inline table valued function, is that you can actually use it in joins as well. We know that this inline table valued function returns a table, so the table returned by the table valued function can be used in joins with other tables. Okay, so if you look at this, when we execute this query, select star from function employees by gender, we got this result back. Since I'm passing in male as the parameter value, I get all male employees like this that you can see on the slide. Now if you look at the output, we have got department ID in the returned table by this function. Okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to join this return table with departments table, so that you can give me the output that you can see here. I want the name of the employee, their gender, and their department name. If you look at the table returned by the function, you don't have department name in that table. So obviously you will have to join the returned table with the departments table. Okay, and if you're new to joins, we have already spoken extensively about joins in part 12 and 13 of this video series. Please check those parts. Okay, now if you look at the query here, it's pretty simple. Just like how you join a table with another table, we do exactly the same thing. Okay, so first of all, what are the columns that we want? We want the name, gender, and department name. So you specify them in your select list. Select name, gender, department name. From, you specify your function name, passing it the parameter that you want. Here we want to pass in male because we want the male employees. So function name male employees, and then give it an alias, just like how you would give an alias to a table. Okay, E for the function, and then join TBL department D on department.id with employee.department.id. Okay, that's about it. So you can even use the table that is returned by an inline table valued function in a join. Let's see the query. So here you have that select name, gender, department name from the function, give it an alias, join with TBL department, give it another alias D on department.id equals employee.department.id. So when we execute that, we get the output that we expect. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.